The wind howled through the pines of Ember Hollow, a quaint mountain town in Colorado where the glow of Hearthstone Lodge, a sprawling retreat famed for its rustic charm and wellness programs, cut through the February dusk like a promise of warmth. Inside, the aroma of cedar and cinnamon mingled with the chatter of wealthy guests and the clink of wine glasses, while staff scurried to maintain the illusion of perfection. At the lodge's heart stood Ruth Delaney, a stout 64-year-old black woman with a tight bun of silver hair and a faded apron, tending the grand fireplace as the hearth keeper. Her presence went unnoticed by the elite who lounged in leather armchairs, their laughter ringing over her quiet work. But tonight, as embers sparked and shadows danced, Ruth held a secret that would soon blaze through the lodge, revealing a truth no one saw coming, and turning the ashes of arrogance into a reckoning that would linger long after the last flame died. Ruth's story was one of grit and grace. Decades ago, she'd founded Hearthstone Lodge with her late husband, Clarence, turning a crumbling cabin into a sanctuary for weary souls. They'd poured their savings and souls into it, Ruth designing the wellness programs, Clarence crafting the timber frames, building a legacy that drew travelers from across the country. After Clarence's death from a stroke 10 years back, Ruth had soldiered on, her hands rough from stoking fires, her heart steady with purpose. The lodge thrived, yoga retreats, gourmet dining, a reputation for healing, and Ruth became its quiet architect, known to all as its visionary founder. 5 years ago, exhausted by the grind, she'd stepped back, handing the reins to her nephew, Leonard Pierce, a man she'd raised like a son after his parents passed. She trusted him to carry the torch, craving a break to hike the trails and rediscover herself. But whispers reached her in retirement, tales of overworked staff, inflated prices, and a lodge turned into a playground for Leonard's ego. Rather than storm in as the owner, Ruth chose a subtler path. She returned in disguise as the hearth keeper, a lowly role no one questioned, to see what had become of her dream. It didn't take long to spot the rot. Leonard, now the self-styled Director of Serenity, strutted through the lodge in tailored suits, his voice dripping with entitlement. He ignored the staff's pleas, maids stretched thin, cooks unpaid overtime, while basking in guest flattery. Worse was his right-hand man, Victor Hayes, the head of operations, a slick 40-something with a predatory grin and a taste for excess. Victor siphoned lodge funds for private ski trips, padded invoices with fake vendors, and treated staff like dirt beneath his polished boots. To them, Ruth was invisible, just the old woman who kept the fire going. One snowy evening, as Ruth swept ash from the hearth, Victor swaggered by, a glass of bourbon in hand. He glanced at her, smirking. "Missed a smudge there, Granny," he said, pointing at a spotless stone. "Can't you do anything right? Stay out of sight if you're going to be useless." Ruth's grip tightened on her broom, but she nodded meekly, her eyes tracking him as he sauntered off. She'd seen this before, his taunts, his casual cruelty, but each jab stoked her resolve. Weeks passed, and Ruth's quiet vigil revealed a lodge on the brink. Staff whispered of Victor's schemes, money vanishing into consulting fees, bookings rigged for his cronies. Leonard turned a blind eye, too busy schmoozing VIPs to care. The worst came when Victor's arrogance turned personal. He'd linger by the hearth, his comments growing bolder. "You're too old for this gig. Smile more, maybe I'll tip you," he'd leer. Then, one night, he cornered her in the supply closet. "Stick around after hours," he murmured, his breath sour with liquor. "Play nice and I'll get you a raise, or you're out by morning." Ruth's stomach churned, but she forced a smile. "We'll see, Mr. Hayes," she whispered, slipping away. That was the ember that lit her fuse. She'd had enough. The next day, Hearthstone buzzed with anticipation. Leonard had called a staff meeting in the Grand Hall expecting to unveil some self-aggrandizing vision. Guests mingled nearby, sipping cocktails, unaware of the storm brewing. Victor lounged at the front, smirking beside Leonard as staff filed in, Maids, cooks, Ruth blending into the back. Then the doors swung open and Ruth stepped forward, not in her apron but in a crisp burgundy blazer, her hair swept elegantly, her presence commanding silence. Leonard's jaw dropped, a nervous laugh escaping. "Aunt Ruth?" "This is a staff meeting. What's with the get-up?" Ruth strode to the center, her voice steady as granite. "I'm exactly where I belong, Leonard." She pulled a folder from her bag and tossed it onto the table. Bank statements, emails, security footage she'd gathered over weeks. "This is proof. Proof of theft, proof of neglect, proof that Hearthstone Lodge, my lodge, has been poisoned by greed." Victor's smirk vanished, his face paling. "What's this nonsense?" he stammered, snatching the folder. His eyes darted over the evidence. His padded expenses, his late-night calls to shady partners, and his hands shook. "It's the truth," Ruth said, her gaze piercing. "I'm Ruth Delaney, founder and owner of this lodge. I built it with love, and you've turned it into a circus." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, a maid dropping her tray. Leonard sputtered. You can't be serious. I've been running this place." "Into the ground," Ruth cut in. "You let Victor bleed it dry while you played king. You forgot the people who keep it alive." She turned to Victor, her voice ice. "And you, stealing, bullying, thinking no one'd notice. You're done." Victor lunged forward, voice rising. "This is a setup. I'll sue. You've got nothing." Ruth nodded to the back where two security guards stepped forward. "Escort Mr. Hayes out. He's fired, and the police are waiting." Victor thrashed, shouting about lawyers, but the guards hauled him off, his protests fading down the hall. She faced Leonard, softer but firm. "I raised you better, nephew. You're relieved of duty, effective now." Leonard's shoulders slumped, his bravado gone as staff nodded in quiet agreement. The reign of excess was over. Ruth addressed the room, her tone warming. "Hearthstone's a refuge. I made it that way. It'll be that again, for guests and staff alike. No more fear, no more favoritism. That's my promise." Applause broke out, tentative, then hearty, from cooks, maids, even a few guests peering in. Ruth stood tall, the weight of her disguise lifted, her lodge reclaimed. Months later, Hearthstone Lodge glowed anew. Ruth resumed leadership, hiring a fair-minded manager and raising staff wages. Victor faced charges, embezzlement, fraud, his swagger no match for jail bars. Leonard retreated to the city, humbled, seeking work with no throne to claim. The lodge returned to its roots. Wellness classes hummed, the hearth crackled, guests felt the care woven into every beam. One evening, as Ruth stoked the fire, apronless now, a maid, Clara, lingered nearby. "You saved us, Ms. Delaney," she said. "We didn't know who you were, but you saw us." Ruth smiled, poking an ember. "Takes seeing to fix things, Clara. I just listened." Clara left, and Ruth gazed into the flames. She'd built this place from nothing, lost it to pride, and reclaimed it with patience. The staff who'd ignored her now greeted her with respect. The guests who'd dismissed her now booked months ahead. Hearthstone stood as proof. True power doesn't shout. It glows, steady and sure, through the darkest nights. One spark reclaimed the flame. This tale proves that integrity burns brighter than pride. If Ruth's resolve warmed you, drop a like to show it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that kindle the spirit. What would you protect like this hearth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're all listening. Until next time. Hold this close. True strength glows through the coldest nights.